Hi. Kom ons kyk nou na die Anne Frank play. So ek het hier 'n opsomming van die hele play wat ek eers gou sal sommer net so deurlees. En dan het ek 'n paar opsommings gemaak van die vrae wat jy vir my gestuur het. So, kom ons gaan gou-gou daardeur. Okay, Otto Frank, the last survivor of a family of German and Dutch Jews, returns to a secret hiding place in which he and his family had lived during the first part of the Holocaust in Amsterdam. His friend and former secretary, Miep Gies, has saved a diary that his daughter Anne kept during that time. Otto begins reading the diary entries aloud, and the play follows Anne's thoughts and actions, as well as those of the other Jews hiding in the secret annex. The Frank family, Anne, Margot, Edith, and Otto, and other Jewish family, the Van Daans, try to coexist peacefully in a small apartment of rooms hidden behind a bookcase in Otto Frank's office in Amsterdam. They must hide from the Nazis who are exterminating Jewish citizens during the Holocaust. The family members may not make noise or leave the hiding place for fear of being discovered. Only Miep Gies and business associate Mr. Kraler are allowed to know of their existence. They help the families by bringing them necessary items and food. Tensions run high between the Frank family and the Van Daan family, especially Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan, and everyone just barely keeps it together. Anne keeps a diary that records the trials and tribulations, so die moeilike tye, experienced by the families, as well as her own coming of age in a tiny room surrounded by frustration, selfishness, and a heaping dose of fear. She battles low spirits, teenage issues, and loneliness. The family learns of the Nazis' terrifying death camps from a man named Mr. Dussel. Then, on Hanukkah, a thief burglarizes the building, ratcheting up tensions even further. So hulle raak nog meer gestres. Things almost seem like they might be turning around when the families learn of the Allied invasion of the Netherlands, and Anne begins to see the potential for a blossoming romance with young Peter Van Daan. Tragically, however, her family's hiding place is discovered, and both families are arrested by the Nazis. Otto Frank completes the reading of the diary and is beyond words at what he had just read. Anne's attitude and outlook on her time spent in the secret annex has clearly affected him. He relates to Miep that after their discovery, the annex residents were deported out of Holland to concentration camps. Anne, her older sister Margot Frank, and Mrs. Frank all died in Bergen-Belsen, one of the most notorious Holocaust death camps. Peter van Daan and Mr. and Mrs. van Daan died in other concentration camps. Otto Frank, who lives to see the Allies defeat Germany in World War II and is rescued by Allied forces, is the only survivor of the Annex crew of 8. The last scene in the play reconnects with the first. Anne's father tells Miep Gies that he is going to go away. Miep begs him to stay, but we can't help to empathize with Mr. Frank and the massive sadness he has to endure now that his whole family has been taken from him. In the end, all he can do is reflect sadly upon Anne's passing. Baie sad story. Okay, so kom ons kyk gou na die karakters. So, hulle het, so basies wat gebeur het is die Nazis het begin om, het Amsterdam en Nederland oorgeneem. En toe het Otto Frank, Anna se pa, het besluit om weg te kruip. En toe het hulle weggekruip in 'n klein kamertjie in die kantore waar hy gewerk het. En of soos kamertjies bo, soos dakkamer tipe ding. En vir haar 13de verjaarsdag het Anne Frank 'n dagboek gekry. En toe hulle in begin wegkruip, het sy begin om 'n dagboek te hou van alles wat gebeur. So let's just look at the characters. So Anne Frank. So Anne is 13 years old. So she's not a normal 13-year-old because she is wild and she doesn't care what people think of her, and she's not ladylike. She's not ladylike. But she is also like a normal 13-year-old because she wants to go play outside and has fun, and she also has a crush on Peter. So in some ways she's just a normal 13-year-old, and in other ways she's not. So Anne's mom was the one who called her wild and self-willed. And her mom also thinks that Anne will walk on other people. So basically this means that she thinks Anne dominates over other people. And Anne doesn't quite agree with her. And then Mr. van Daan criticizes Anne for not being ladylike. So onthou jy toe ons die Afrikaanse boek gedoen het, toe het ek so vir jou gesê ons kyk na wat is die feit en dan kyk ons na 'n aanhaling van wat dit bewys. So hierdie is tweede taal en dit is nie so rof nie en dis ook nie 'n opstel nie. Maar hierdie is basies soos as ons kyk na karakters in 'n storie of 'n play of enige so iets, dan kyk ons hoe oor hulle karaktereienskappe, weet ons wie hulle is, omdat ander mense van hulle goed sê, en uit hoe hulle optree, en uit wat hulle van hulle self sê. So ek het begin om te sê sy's wild and she doesn't care what people think of her, en dit kom van wat haar ma gesê het. En she's not ladylike, en dit kom van wat meneer Van Daan vir haar gesê het. Hy het vir haar gesê dat meisies sy moet meer ladylike wees. So he told her that she must be a domestic girl who will keep her house shining for her husband. En toe sê sy vir hom, sy sal eerder haar keel sny as wat sy ooit daai tipe mens gaan wees. So Anne says that she will rather cut her throat than being a domestic girl. En so in daardie manier is sy nie soos 'n normale 13 jaar oue dogtertjie nie. Ten minste nie van daai tyd nie. Onthou, dit was nou al 'n hele ruk terug. Okay, so Anne wants to be remarkable and not like other girls. So dit is ook deel wat sy en meneer Van Daan vir mekaar sê. Sy sê sy wil nie dit wees nie, sy sal eerder I'll rather slit my throat because I want to be remarkable. En as ons nou kyk na wat sy gedoen het in haar lewe, basies het sy 'n baie kort lewe gehad en hulle is dood in die konsentrasiekampe. Sy is dood aan tyfus, wat 'n siekte is wat ons bespreek het in die lewenswetenskap video, onthou jy? Maar sy het haar droom bereik. Sy het gesê she wants to be remarkable and she did become world famous and remarkable. So net omdat sy hierdie dagboek geskryf het, weet almal hoe dit was vir haar en sy het baie goed geskryf vir 'n 13-jarige. En as ek nou reg onthou is die dagboek van haar is nog steeds op die bestseller list. Van, jy weet, dus hoeveel kopieë van boeke al ooit gepubliseer is of verkoop is. So in daardie manier was sy regtig remarkable. Okay, so ons kan ook sê Anne was hopeful. So Mr. Frank says, she puts me to shame because even when they were captured, she was still hopeful. She kept believing, she thinks that people are really good at heart because people can change. So throughout this whole ordeal, she was always remained hopeful that there will be a better future. Especially, ek gaan net hierso by sê, especially when they heard from Mr. Dussel that the Allies, so ek weet nie of jy onthou van geskiedenis nie, maar die Allies was die Amerika en Frankryk en Engeland, wat en hulle het in Nederland ingekom om die Duitsers om die Nazis uit te skop. So sy was nog baie gelukkig toe hulle hoor dat let me just change back to English again. So especially when they heard from Mr. Dussel that the Allies invaded the Netherlands. Okay, so toe was daar hoop, want as die Nazi regering, jy weet, as die Allies die oorlog wen, dan kry hulle land terug en dan hoef hulle nie meer in weg te kruip nie. Okay, we also know that Anne has a good imagination. She tells Peter that imagination is a way of escaping the annex. So sy sê vir hom, ons is stak hier in hierdie kamertjie, maar ons kan ons imaginations gebruik en dan is ons nie stak nie. En dan Mr. Dussel finds Anne very annoying. She's a bit of a know-it-all. Okay, and then Mr. Frank, so sy naam was Otto Frank, is Anna se pa. So Anne and her father had a very good relationship. Hulle was baie close en hulle het baie goed oor die weg gekom. So we also know that Mr. Frank loves his family and he always tries to calm them down. He's a good leader. He's the leader of the group. He's the one who got them all together and made this plan to get them into hiding. But he got very angry for the first time when Mr. Van Daan stole food. He was very upset because they're all trying to live together and make it through this war. But then Mr. Van Daan, who was living with them and supposed to be, part of their little group, was stealing from them. And he said that we don't have to wait for the Nazis to destroy us because we're destroying ourselves. So he was very, very upset. So he said that they were destroying themselves by stealing from each other. We'll talk about the Van Daan's family a little bit later, but the Frank family was much closer, and they all tried to help each other and tried to stay positive, although Anne and her mom didn't always get along so well. But the Van Daan family was much more, they were very rich, and they kind of looked down on everyone and thought that they deserved better. So there was always conflict between the two families. So we also know about Mr. Frank that he tries to keep the group safe, because when they were fighting, when he got angry with Mr. Van Daan, he didn't want Miep to find out that they were arguing, because he wanted them to keep helping them from the outside. He was scared that if she knew that it wasn't going well, that they would say that this isn't a good idea and they shouldn't keep living there. And then after the invasion, so when I say the invasion, sorry, I'm net gou hier reg maak. That's right. Okay, so after the invasion, so when I'm saying the invasion, I mean the Allies invading to save the Netherlands. Okay, so after the invasion, it didn't matter anymore that Mr. Van Daan was stealing, because now they had hope that they're actually going to get out of there. And then let's have a look at Anne's mom, Mrs. Frank. So Anne thinks her mother is rude because she shoos her away, and she and her mom often, doesn't get along very well. But Mrs. Frank also comforts Anne. And then we've got Margot Frank, Anne's sister, and where Anne and her dad got along really well because they were much more similar. Mrs. Frank and Margot had a very good relationship. They got along very well and understood each other better. Then we had Miep Gies. Miep Gies was the lady who helped them from the outside. She worked in the office, in the warehouse, in the office where they were hiding. And then we have Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan, Peter's mom and dad. So the Van Daan family were rich and spoiled. Mr. Van Daan stole food because he thought they deserved better. And then Mrs. Van Daan said, it's because he's bigger than everyone else. He needs more food. Let me write that in here as well. Mrs. Van Daan said he needs more food because he is bigger. So she always tried to excuse her husband's bad behavior. So she tried to excuse her husband's bad behavior. All right. And then when Mr. Dussel arrived, Mr. Van Daan, everyone's happy about him. Everyone goes, oh, welcome. And except for Mr. Van Daan, he complains and he thinks now there won't be enough food for everyone. So he's kind of always thinking about himself. So we can say he's selfish. Yeah. All right. And then we have their son, Peter Van Daan. So Peter, same as Anne, they just want to be normal kids and play and ride bicycles and do normal kid stuff. But they're stuck there in this attic or annex. He had a good sense of humor, but his parents did not always approve of his sense of humor. He played a prank on all of them. He played a prank during Hanukkah. Twee kaas. Ja, ek weet het. Okay, and when they first arrived in the annex, Peter burned the Star of David. So the Star of David was basically all of the Jews had to wear this yellow patch. They had to have it sewn into all of their clothes so that the public, all the people in the town can know, oh, there goes a Jew. So it was just another way for the Nazis to be oppressive and mean to the Jews, is to have them all wear these stars. So when they got into the annex, Peter took his off and he burnt it. Anne didn't burn hers because she saw it as a part of her religion. Because the Star of David is a symbol of the Jewish religion for her, but for him it was a sign of their oppression by the Nazis. I must say, for me, like knowing the history, I think it's a little strange that she didn't want to burn it. Okay, and then there is Mr. Kraler. So he also worked in the office, and him and Miep Gies were the only two people who knew that they were there. And then the last to join them after they've lived there for a while, Mr. Dussel joined them. So when he arrived, everyone welcomed him except for the Van Daans. But then Mr. Dussel also told them that the Jews were being taken to death camps. They didn't know that beforehand. So it also, brought the mood down a lot. Right, so now let's look at a couple of different things. So we're starting here with captivity. So we're talking about, I actually first wanted to do this one. Let's move this one up and do this one first. So let's just first talk about their living conditions. So, and their relationships. Well, basically, yeah. Okay, so for 2 years, Anne and her parents and her sister, Margot, and the Van Daan family with Peter, and then later Mr. Dussel, lived in very cramped conditions. So there was very little space available. They lived in an annex. So die woord annex is so solder of dakkamer, extra stukkie van die huis. And it was in Mr. Frank's office. And there was a bookshelf that blocked the door. Dit was so annex, laat ek eerder hier so amper soos 'n ekstra kamertjie. Okay, and then so the bookshelf could only open from the inside. So they felt a bit more safe. They couldn't, so during the day there were people in the office working, and only Miep Gies and Mr. Kraler knew that they were there. So they couldn't make a noise, so they couldn't use the toilet they couldn't flush because then people would hear them, and they could only speak in whispers. So you can imagine that they didn't have any privacy, because they're all stuck there in this small place together, and they couldn't get away from each other. So you have Anne has a fight with her mom, and she can't even run away and run to her room and slam the door. And she and Peter couldn't get away from their parents. Like, they couldn't have a moment alone. And then when Mr. Dussel arrived, then it became more cramped, because now there's an extra person, and there was less food available, like Mr. Van Daan pointed out. But they were also more stressed, more tense, because they heard about the death camps. So now it's even more serious that they be quiet and that nobody finds them. Because now they know that if they get captured, they don't just go to a concentration camp, they go to death camps. So there's more tension in the house with all of them. So all of this kind of thing with being quiet the whole day, being in each other's space the whole time, and being stressed about, are they going to survive this, put strain on all of the relationships. So it was very easy for everyone to get annoyed with each other and not wanting to be there, because they couldn't go outside at all. Imagine 2 years stuck with 6 people in a house, not even a house, in a small little couple of back rooms, and you're only allowed to whisper. And constantly you know that if someone catches you, you're going to go to a concentration camp. Or if someone catches you, you're going to go to the death camps. So their living conditions were it wasn't great, and it was terrible. But like Anne pointed out in her diary, she was still hopeful, because yes, we have to be here now so that we can survive, and you can escape through your imagination. So she had a very positive light on all of the situation. So if we're looking at the theme of captivity, so dit is basies captivity, dis is hoe is hulle vasgevang. So natuurlik het hulle gekies om daar te wees in die annex, maar nie omdat hulle wou nie, sodat hulle kan oorleef. So dit was amper asof hulle gevangenes gehou is in daai kamertjies, in daai annex, uit hulle eie keuse uit, want hulle wou nie deur die Nazis gevang gewees het nie. So hier's net 'n bietjie daaroor. So Anne aan die heel begin het sy gesê sy weet sy gaan dit baie mis om buite te wees. Sy was altyd, soos haar ma gesê het, baie wild, en het daarvan gehou, soos 'n tomboy, sy het daarvan gehou om te fiets te ry en rond te hardloop en te speel, en ek dink nou is dit baie meer normaal vir meisies om dit te doen, maar toe was dit baie van soos meisies bly by die huis, en dit was baie meer meisies doen dit en seuns doen dit, terwyl vandag is dit nie meer so erg nie. So she says that she'll know she will miss being outside. So she said she'll never to breathe fresh air, never to run and shout and jump. For myself, okay, so dan het sy 'n lysie gemaak van alles wat almal gaan mis. So sy sê, for myself, sy gaan mis om fiets te ry, to ride bike again, to laugh until my belly aches, to have new clothes, So dit is wat sy gaan mis. And then she writes what all the other characters are going to miss. So Miss Van Daan misses her home, she misses her house with her own things. And she misses the piano that her dad gave her. Ek dink regtig nie dis belangrik dat jy weet wat se tipe klavier dit is nie. So sy mis haar klavier. Peter said he would like to go to the movies. And Mr. Dussel, he was a dentist. So he was thinking that he's never going to get his dentist drawl back, which I think is a little strange if you ask me. So the people were in captivity and they knew that if they would ever be, what? Oh, they didn't know, sorry, ek kan my eie sin nie lees nie. They didn't know if they would ever be able to go back to normal life again. And they were constantly fearing, they were in constant fear that they're going to be captured. So in your exam, from what I've seen, it looks like they're going to ask you to write a dialogue between characters in the story. And then you can use these kind of things. You know, like in the conversation, they can go, shh, don't talk so loud. Be quiet. Or Miss Van Daan can say, oh, I miss my piano. And Miss Dussel tells her, why would you miss your piano, woman? I just want my dentist roll back. So you can use these kind of things in the conversation between the two characters, or between whichever characters you need to put in the dialogue that you're writing. So even if you're not using it, you know, if you don't get asked a question about it in the short questions, you can use the things like the privacy and people getting annoyed with each other and shh, remember not to flush the toilet as things in your dialogue that you need to write. And then the last bit here was about Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is a Jewish festival around Christmas. And they all celebrated Hanukkah. Hanukkah, ek weet nie of ek dit reg uitspreek nie. So they all celebrated together as if they're as a family. Even though, but they were not related by blood. But they were like a family in the sense that they were all living together. They must all share everything. And that they're all Jewish. They all have the same faith. And they're all hiding from the Germans. So in that sense, they had a lot of things in common and were like a family. And then Anne gave them all Hanukkah gifts. And they wanted to sing a Hanukkah song because they're celebrating, but Mr. Frank said they can't. So Mr. Frank was, like I said earlier, he was like the leader. And he said they can't because they don't want the outside people to know that they're there. Because the song gets more loud, it gets more of a beat towards the end. So he doesn't want them to be people to accidentally hear them. And then Peter has a sense of humor and he pranks everyone. But then the celebrations ended because they heard a noise downstairs. So suddenly they're busy all, celebrating Hanukkah, and suddenly there's a noise. So everyone starts being very quiet because now you can imagine it's like, what is that? Is that the Nazis coming to take us away to death camps? So the tension was very high. So tension. Hoe spel mens dit? Tension was very high. And ag, dis 'n S. Sien jy, ek weet nie in Engels wanneer dit 'n T moet wees en wanneer dit 'n S moet wees nie. Dit klink dan dieselfde. Okay, so hulle was want hulle weet nie wat dit is nie. En ons weet, so ons sien dat Mr. Frank is die leier, want hy is die een wat gaan kyk of alles okay is. So Mr. Frank is the leader because he goes to see where the noise comes from. And we also know that he's the leader because he told them not to sing the Hanukkah song. But then Mr. Frank went to look, and it was only thieves breaking into the office. So they were kind of like so relieved that it was just someone breaking in, and they didn't find them, so they're still safe. And then he asked Anne to sing the Hanukkah song to lighten the mood, because they were all very tense at the time. All right, so that is what I got from the notes that you sent me. I really hope it is sufficient. Ek hoop is genoeg. En ja, laat weet my as daar nog ietsie is wat ek vir jou moet record of vir jou moet beter verduidelik of iets. Maar andersins ek hoop dit help baie. En jou laaste eksamen, yay! Dan is dit vakansie. Geniet dit. Bye. Daar's nog een van Goodbye Mr. Tom. So nog nie baie nie.